Welcome back in to Prospect, Produce, Prosper. I am John Jagay, joined by Marc Rogers, and I am excited, Marc Rogers of Producers Prospect, about our topic today.
Well, Jag, this is kind of fun because normally you're sort of playing the ringleader on this, and you're making the questions, and you're interviewing the folks that we've had on, or me, and we're going to reverse roles on this one. So I'm kind of excited today, and today's all about podcasting. I wish it was about 90s music, radio DJ trivia for you, because you could probably just...
Another strong suit of mine,
you
yes.
could probably just crush that one. But today's podcasting. I think I've done something like 30,000 financial interviews over the years, and I'm constantly asking what advisors want to more fully develop in their practice. That's normally an opening question. Mm-hmm. And one of those is always to gain more clients.
Sure.
And so I want to just jump right in. And you've got a really interesting background. I think that your knowledge has not been shown yet, and your value truly in our lineup of podcasting, although every single day between our podcasts, you're doing podcasts with financial advisors all over the country. I really want to focus on why podcasting today. It seems silly that we're having still this conversation in 2022, but I think that there's maybe some myths and some unknowns when it comes to podcasting.
Sure.
Certainly, I've met enough advisors over the years and even still that are paying, $20,000, $30,000 price tags a month in their marketing. And it's going to traditional radio, and it's going to TV ads that are infomercials, and it's going to things where I go, man, podcasting is so easy. So let's just jump into it. Why do you think, Jag, that every advisor should have a podcast today? And why is it important for their brand?
It is the fastest growing single medium out there, Marc. And thank you for the introduction, of course. And you alluded to it. My background is in radio. I was a radio DJ for 15 years. And then about 5 years ago, I got into podcasting because that's where the industry was going. I could give you stats all day about how radio has fallen off, but any person who follows anything can tell you that people are listening to the radio less than they were before, particularly in the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. Podcasting, which had already been on the upswing, took off like a rocket ship because people were at home, they were creating, they were consuming content. And that was really when podcasting kind of went from the atmosphere to the stratosphere, I guess you could say.
Sure.
Because that is when things really, really took off. Over 80% of Americans age 12 and up are familiar with podcasting or have listened to a podcast at this point. Among heavy consumers, they listen to 8 episodes a week. So this is not going anywhere. It's really the medium and easiest way to attract clients and get your name out there. You talked about TV and radio ads. If you buy a radio ad, people are flipping the station in the car in half a second when their commercial comes on. If you buy a TV ad, ever heard of a DVR? Outside of sports and a couple, live entertainment events, people aren't watching commercials on the television anymore either. So you may as well be lighting your money on fire at that point.
Well, what I do know is I'm busy, and therefore every other American is busy today.
Yes.
And Netflix and Hulu and everybody else has got this figured out for regular viewing TV. And this is where it's really gone for radio, right? The days of everybody huddled up on Sunday afternoon at 2:00 to listen to your AM radio show. Okay, maybe that works in certain markets. Birmingham, Alabama. I don't know. I'm sure that there are
maybe small town.
Yeah,
there are some radio stations, some small towns that are fabric of the community. That's fine, but as you get to medium and bigger size markets, they're not as relevant anymore. There's just too much competition, Marc.
So if I look at podcasting, right, number one, I think it's fun.
Yeah.
There's so much availability to be flexible with your show. It doesn't always have to be around the same thing. I even tell advisors, you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room on every single topic every single time.
Right.
What's great about podcasting is bring in the experts. And what you're kind of doing at the same time is getting free advertising because everybody wants to be on some of these podcasts. So when I say, hey, you're Mr. Attorney, I want you to come on, be the expert, and talk about estate planning mistakes. Would you do that for me? Those guys are way more apt to do that. And then guess what? They post it to their network. They put it on their newsletter. They want to let people know that they're sought out and want to be interviewed. And you can do that in just about every market. So number one, it's fun. 2, you can constantly change the themes, the people that you have on, so it's new and different. It's a great referral, and I always talk about how to make yourself become more referable to your investors.
Right.
Podcasting is a great way to do that, but And you kind of addressed who's listening. I think that more and more people are listening to podcasts than ever before.
I can confirm that. And I think there's a bit of a misperception, to answer one of your earlier questions, Mark, that it's a young person's game. It's not. Sure, 18 to 34-year-olds are listening, but 45 to 54-year-olds are listening. 65 plus is listening. It's gaining across all demographics, including the people who have high net worth that you want to bring in. And also want to go back to what you said a moment ago about bringing on guests. Any person's favorite topic is themselves. You and I have been in marketing long enough that we both know that, right?
No doubt. Yep.
I can't tell you of any time I've ever been asked to be on a podcast and I've said no. I'm not making a dime to be on somebody's podcast. But if somebody wants a podcast expert on their show, they bring me in. Same thing, if, like you said, an estate planning attorney, a plumber, a lawyer, a doctor, whoever it is, if you say, hey, I want to feature you on my podcast so you can talk about your expertise and what you know about, and oh, by the way, at the end of the podcast, I'll let you give a plug for our listeners if anybody wants to contact you, they'd be silly to not promote that on their own network. It goes up on their LinkedIn, their Facebook, their Twitter, like you said, their newsletters, their emails, and now you are expanding your network and your reach of the audience of that podcast by getting into your guest network, and that piece of it doesn't cost you a dime if you want to talk about ROI here.
So let's just talk about how advisors, where do they use the podcast, maybe within their sales funnel? Mm-hmm. You know, I think that the traditional way, Jag, that people think of a podcast is, oh, someone's got to go out and find me on, Spotify or iTunes. Like once you've got the show done and recorded, now where do you post it? And how do we create followers?
I'm really glad you asked me that, Mark, because this actually plays into another one of the biggest misconceptions about podcasting. Because as soon as you have a podcast, you'll probably start getting spam emails. Hey, I can get you to the top of the Apple charts. I can get you number one in your category in Apple. I'm sure you've seen it with your podcast, this podcast.
Every day.
That is, I almost swore there for a second, but it's crap. It doesn't matter. The Apple charts don't matter. That is a big misconception.
Okay.
The top 3 ways that people find a podcast are, number 1, Google search, so SEO, which you can help by putting detailed show notes and even a transcription of your podcast if you want. The second way people find out about podcasts is what I call old school word of mouth. Friends, family, they are recommending podcasts. Hey, I listened to this great podcast. You should go check it out. And third is what I call new school word of mouth, social media. You are scrolling through your Twitter feed, your Facebook feed, your Instagram feed, your TikTok feed, whatever it is, and you stumble upon a podcast that way. So internet search, word of mouth, social media. That's how people find podcasts. So to further answer your question, Mark, that is how you get the word out about your podcast. You complete the marketing circle, if you will, because yes, in your podcast, you'll promote all your social media, your email, your phone number, your contact info at the end, but you will actually share the link to the podcast. It's as simple as copy and pasting a link when it's published. You paste that link on your Facebook, you paste that link on your Twitter, your Instagram, your LinkedIn. You can even create a short video, a 30-second video clip that has a transcript lit up of what people are saying, throw that up online too, and then add a link in the comments of the post so people can find the podcast. There are so many ways to repurpose this content. Compare that with sending somebody an old-fashioned mailer that they might look at for 30 seconds. If you're lucky, it might stay up on their fridge for a day, but most likely it's going in the trash with all the other junk mail, or some social media marketing campaign that you might pay for where the posts are here and there and gone. A podcast is going to last forever and give you content to repurpose forever.
So let's just break this down a little bit. Number 1, I think that people are worried about having to put together some 30, 60-minute infomercial together as their, quote, content for their podcast.
Right.
And they have to do it all the time. So again, what I love about podcasting is that it can kind of work within your time frame.
Yeah.
If you want to do 1 show a month or you want to do 4 shows a month, I think maybe 4 is almost a little too excessive, but there is a level of getting enough shows to be recognized. Like you can't have just a one and done mentality with podcasting, right? You got to constantly be putting it out there because that's going to drive your SEO. But here's the deal. Not every show has to be 30 minutes or 60 minutes. In fact, sometimes some of the best shows that I've even heard are 15 minutes.
Sure.
The other thing too that I love about podcasting is now you have 30 minutes of audio, sometimes audio visual, which we're going to get to in a second. But now you have little break points that you can cut up a 1 minute, a 2 minute rant that you have, or even a sentence. And you can use that as a meme, as a social media post. You can put it on your website under a topic to tease. You can use it as a Google ad or a Facebook ad. You can use it as lead gen. Hey, want to hear more, You give people 2 minutes on your podcast, want to hear more, subscribe,
right?
And you get all of this content. It's a great place to live on your website, right? Because you want to be able to tell your value, tell your story. And then I'll even go one step further. And today, and you and I both know, I do a bunch of these live dinner seminars where we're bringing people into high-end restaurants and educating them. And that's how we're getting appointments. Well, there's this whole pregame and postgame that are more important than even the presentation, I feel like. And a podcast is a great way to, when somebody signs up for your seminar, they don't know who Jag is from the next 12 advisors, right?
Right.
That we can send them a 15-minute intro podcast about, hey, this is going to be your speaker on Tuesday night. Listen to him. And that first podcast is all the emotional tie-up to why I'm so passionate about what I do and who I care about, and here's who I work with. And then you can send them multiple presentations before the event. Now people know you because they can hear you. They've emotionally connected to you. Now they're ready to learn. And then on the post game, now they're getting multiple podcasts over the next 30, 60, 90 days. So it's a great drip versus an email on, some topic that people don't care about. Here's a personal touch to say, hey, remember me, and here's why we need to continue to talk.
2 points I want to make on what you just said, Mark. You talk about the sales funnel, the marketing funnel. We've talked about that in previous episodes. What you're describing, you're skipping the unaware phase. You're skipping the lead phase, because if someone's coming to your dinner seminar and they've already heard you on a couple episodes of the podcast, you've already established that credibility and that familiarity. Now you can prospect them, turn them into a customer, and the follow-up is right there. I would say to an advisor listening right now, do you find yourself with your prospects coming into your office having the same exact conversation with every single prospect that comes in? And you've probably had a moment where you've thought to yourself, geez, if I could just take out a tape recorder and record this conversation and play it back, I'd save myself a lot of time. That's essentially what you're doing here, right? Because you're explaining all the things, you're answering all those frequently asked questions you get from prospective clients. Here, check out this 15-minute podcast. It's a quick explainer of everything. And then you've already kind of got a jump start. They've already committed time to you, because committing to a podcast for 15 minutes even is a lot more than just clicking on a Facebook post or sitting there and reading some, white paper online, which can be great tools, but you are establishing that credibility and familiarity with your prospective client before you're even meeting them in person. And that's why it can be such a great tool.
I feel like forever we've used mediums like a book or even a shortened white paper to connect with people and build that same credibility. Many advisors at these live events will say, hey, here's how you download my book, and you need to read chapters 3, 4, and 5 before you come in.
Yeah, jeez.
How many are actually going to do that, right? Let's just be honest with ourselves. But the great thing about podcasting is, hey, listen to episodes 1 and 2, or you send them the episode. Hey, before our meeting, you wanted more information.
Or you have a QR code where all somebody has to do is pull out their phone like it's a menu in a restaurant, and boom, the podcast comes right up. It's so easy, Mark.
It's so easy and it's accessible. And the other great thing, and you and I talk about this all the time, and I'm going to segue into ROI. So be ready for my next question about what's the ROI. But I love podcasting because you get real numbers. How many people are watching, what kind of engagement is happening, how long, which shows did better than another one. And that all tells me so much versus the AM radio, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
What kind of analytics do people really, really get today, right? So I guess here's the question to you, Jack. Mm-hmm. Every advisor that I sit down with, and I go and build a marketing plan, and I tell them, here's exactly what we're going to do every month. And here is the amount of dinner seminars, and here's the amount of client appreciation events and all the things, all the social media posts. And I get, what's my ROI? If I gave you 100 pennies, what are you going to turn that 100 pennies into tomorrow? It seems like that's about the time frame people want their return.
Yep.
How do you answer that with podcasting? Because that's always an interesting one that I get thrown at, and I would love to hear, what would you say to somebody?
Let me zoom out for a second, Mark, when it comes to the ROI, because I think there are people who get into podcasting, they see Joe Rogan or The Daily from the New York Times or any of these big, huge podcasts that have millions of listeners, and they say, okay, I'm going to get a podcast and use it as a money-making tool. It is possible you'll make money directly off your podcast, but it will take 1 to 3 years to build that foundation. The point of doing a podcast, particularly in this area, in this field, is not monetary ROI. It's the marketing ROI. because you are going to put your material out there. You're going to establish yourself as an expert and a credibility in the space. And by doing so, somebody's going to call you and say, hey, I heard your podcast on Roth IRA conversions, or I heard your podcast on, inflation, or where the markets are in the first half of 2022, whatever the topic is. I really like what you had to say. I'm interested in having a conversation with you. If you have one high net worth client that calls you and becomes a client out of this whole deal, your podcast episodes have all paid for themselves several times over, as opposed to these fleeting marketing, mailers and AM radio and old school ways of doing things. By creating content, this content can be evergreen that can keep working for you as long as you keep promoting it without even having to create new content.
Well, no doubt. And it's something you just said really, struck an interesting chord with me. Mm-hmm. Because I think too often, and we are in a very serious business, right? Financial planning is very serious business because you're handling people's money.
Yeah.
But what I love about podcasting is, frankly, when I said at the beginning that it can be fun, what I meant is you can also be genuine.
Yeah.
You can be who you are. You can really show that personality, where most financial advisors want everything to be, fit and trim and perfect sounding, which, when you get somebody like you that can edit and make us sound really good and take out all the ums and uhs and screw ups, that's a big deal. But what I love about podcasting is that you can just be yourself and you can be passionate about what you talk about. The other thing is to me about podcasting is not everything has to be a home run. We think about podcasting in a couple of different ways, and not every show has to be better than the last. And it's got to be just this total heartwarming, connection podcast. Sometimes you got to grind through the really thick content, only to get to the next one, right? And the last thing I would say about podcasting that I love so much is the fact that you can play different roles. You don't always have to be the lead man every single time. You can be the interviewer. If there's a topic like Social Security or Medicare or even Bitcoin or something like that you're just like, okay, I don't.
Oh, geez, yeah. That's a whole can of worms, yeah.
But you can bring somebody else and you can be the one interviewing, right? And that's kind of fun because you can flip roles and you don't always have to lead and be the go-to guy. One of the things that I wanted to get to is, Jag, I get all the time. So here's another myth or a misconception. Mm-hmm. I can't do podcasting because I'm securities licensed and compliance has a hard time with the fact that I'm going to record this presentation. How do you handle compliance and how do you make sure that we are saying the things that we should be saying?
Well, compliance is obviously nature of the beast in this business for our advisors and potential clients. And many advisors I work with have to have the podcast approved by compliance. And it depends on what you're captive and who you're working with and who your compliance department is through. There are some clients that, as long as they send a rough outline of a script to their compliance department, that's okay. For the most part, the compliance is going to need to hear the audio, and that's okay. So what we'll do is we'll sit down, we'll record the podcast. I'll take it into my lab and I'll edit it and I'll take out, like you said, the ums and ahs and likes and you-knows and false starts and all that kind of stuff, smooth things out. If you were to say something at some point in the podcast and say, oh, shoot, you know what? I can't say that. Compliance is going to nail me on that because if you've been doing this for a while, you have a pretty good sense for what you can and can't say. No problem. Snip it out before we send the edit over. Once the podcast is finished editing, I'll send you an MP3. I'll Dropbox it to your Google Drive, whatever. I'll just send you the audio file. You send it to your compliance department, and when they say, okay, all right, Jag, compliance approved it, we hit publish, and it's good to go. So it's just a matter of having to submit to the compliance department the finished audio when it's done. So you'll find a way, you'll be yourself, you'll give, like you said, Mark, listeners a way to understand your personality and get a feel for who you are as a person and your style. And then as long as you don't start talking about things you're not allowed to talk about, it's not often I have a compliance department come back and say, hey, you've got to take out the sentence about such and such, or this paragraph has to go. But when that does happen, okay, hey, Jag, here's the note from compliance. They said this part has to go from 9:30 to 10:02 where we talk about whatever. No problem. Make the edit. Goes back to compliance. Compliance is okay, and we publish it. So it's really not that much of an obstacle to get the podcast published. It's just one additional step.
Yeah. So let's just unpack that for a second. So what I heard you say and some of the things that we can do to make this really successful for advisors is one, we could sort of pre-game the podcast. And I get all the time, hey, I want to be a big time podcast show host, but I don't even know where to start or what I would talk about. Right. Well, number one, you can sit down with us. we can lay out all of your podcasts, which compliance loves, right? So you can actually write all of the questions out, the speaker notes, the bullet points.
Yeah.
You can have the disclosure set up. Number two is this is all pre-recorded. So there's no live, there's no something that we can just ad lib or throw in. We can be very clear and concise. And with your editing ability, you can make it just sound seamless when there is maybe something that we have to take out after we've already done the recording. The other piece that I heard too is that you really will help advisors in the posting. So where does it go? How does it get posted? What places can be used? And all the speaker notes, right? Everything is all laid out so that it's concise and written out. Therefore, that's just getting ahead of the game. So I love that because that handles many of the objections that I hear about. Here's why I do or don't want to do podcasting, right? And yeah, I think people get fearful of being out on the wavelengths forever. That's why the editing is so key, right? Is to just make sure that we are being super accurate and compliant. And that's where you really step in to help.
Well, yeah, if you are a client of mine or ours, there's no way I'm going to let you put something out into the world that is going to misrepresent you or represent you poorly in any way. And one other thing you said about mapping out the podcast ahead of time, one of my very early mentors in radio, Marc, gave me this analogy. He said, doing a radio show, or in this case, a podcast, is like driving a NASCAR. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a NASCAR fan. I don't really know the first thing about NASCAR, except that they turn left a lot. But he said, doing a radio show is like driving a NASCAR. Do all your work in the pit, so when the light turns green, all you've got to do is drive. Some of my best podcasts that I've produced, real simple. Night before, they shoot me an email and they say, Jag, here's the topic, and here's the 6 points that I want to hit in this podcast. Great. I've been interviewing people for 20 years with my background in radio. If these are the points that I know you want to hit, I'm going to make you look the best you possibly can look or sound the best you can possibly sound. And I'm going to weave those points into a conversation, make it a conversation, as we've done in this podcast. We might make a couple wisecracks here and there, keep things light, keep things moving, and you're going to get your point across in a very relatable way.
Okay, so before we get to the end of this show, one of the things that I get asked all the time, so again, myth versus maybe reality. Do I need to do both video and audio? Can you kind of break down what are the benefits of having video? And maybe what are the benefits of not doing video with audio? And can you get results of just doing pure audio?
Yes. I'm going to answer the last question first. Yes. So video is the sexy thing. Video is everywhere on the internet. All the marketing people are talking about video, especially now we have 5G phones. We can download and watch video faster and all that. But I can tell you from my background in radio that audio goes where video can't. I always tell clients you can't watch a YouTube video while you're driving, or at least you really shouldn't. You can listen to a podcast in the car. I listen to podcasts every morning when I'm walking my dog. You can take audio where video can't go. And there's actually data out there. If you think about your favorite morning show that you grew up listening to, your favorite radio show, you felt like you knew the people behind the microphone because you heard them every morning. There's a certain intimacy to audio that video doesn't have. Because when you are listening to audio, your brain is actually more engaged because your mind has to paint the picture. The picture isn't just there in front of you like on television or like on YouTube. So audio physiologically is 36% more memorable than video because it's causing your brain to create a picture and commit that picture to memory that you've created. So there's a value to audio. And yes, the next logical question is, well, don't you need to be on YouTube and SEO? Isn't that helpful? Yes. Well, there are tools that we can use to create a video version of your audio podcast and put the audio version on YouTube because a number of folks are listening to podcasts on YouTube, even if they're not watching them, because guess what? As you may know, Google owns YouTube. So you get on YouTube, that's going to help with your SEO for Google. So your audio podcast can easily go on YouTube and you can check the box for a presence on YouTube and SEO. That said, if you want to do a video podcast, great. That's fantastic. You can absolutely do a video podcast. I can tell you that to make a professional looking video podcast is a lot more time and money intensive than to make an audio podcast. An audio podcast is easy. If you have limited bandwidth and limited time, audio podcast is easy to do. Doing a video podcast is going to require lighting and multiple cameras and the setup and all that stuff. Sure, you can do it, and it's great if you have the time and the staff to put it together, but you can get all the benefits of video just by doing audio.
Okay, so as we wrap up, here's my call to action today. Obviously, if you're listening to my podcast, then you've taken the right step. You're listening, so please share, subscribe, and listen to all the other shows. 2 is you can set up a time on my website. So if you go to producersprospect.com, you can schedule a time on my Calendly link to talk about podcasting. And you can put in the notes, I want to talk to you about podcasting. And you could set up a time with Jag and I, and we'll sit down and talk with you about how we could help you and how we could grow your network and help you become more referable and all the things that we talked about, making you a success here in 2022. Reach out to us at 800-829-5596, 800-829-5596, and we can schedule our call together there. Jag, always fantastic. I'm so glad we jumped into getting some of your knowledge in this show because we needed a breakout Jag session. And
I appreciate that, Mark. And a confession, I always get more nervous as the guest than I am the host. So hopefully I didn't flub my way through it. And if I did, I'll just edit it out.
That's right. That's right. No, you're phenomenal. I always appreciate you for all that you do and for all the advisors that you work with. This is kind of a thankless job, and therefore, thank you. Appreciate you.
You're welcome, and the feeling is mutual, Mark. Thank you.